I asked my son when he got married, and he looked at me with a smirk and said we already did it. These were the words that hit me like a freight train after 25 years of waking up at 5:30 every morning to make sure he had breakfast and his lunch packed every Saturday, driving him to soccer practice, and spending over $47,632.50 on piano lessons, dance classes, summer camps, and even that expensive science kit he wanted for his birthday on April 12th, 2008, I never imagined that my life of sacrifice would be reduced to a single sentence delivered in that cold tone. I stood there in the kitchen of my blue painted house on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, the smell of fresh brewed coffee, still steaming from the pot the morning sun, hitting the wooden floorboards. And yet none of it mattered, because in that exact moment, I felt invisible, like every single ounce of love, care, and attention I had poured into his life had evaporated into thin air. He crossed his arms and said with a hint of disdain, "Are you serious, Dad? I thought you would be happy for me." I froze for 15 minutes staring at the calendar on the wall, noting the days I had spent saving up for his college fund. Every coin, every dollar meticulously counted to make sure he never had to worry about a thing, while he now casually announced a life-changing decision without a single word of warning or consultation. I remember the clock ticking, the second hand moving steadily like a cruel reminder of how quickly everything I had built for him could be dismissed. I could hear my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, across the street, talking to her grandson in the yard, her voice warm and cheerful, yet it contrasted painfully with the cold hammer reality I was experiencing. I wanted to scream, but the words stuck in my throat. I wanted to grab his shoulders and shake some sense into him, but my hands hung limp at my sides, the quilt my grandmother had sewn for me back in 1972 still covering the sofa behind me felt like the last piece of comfort in a suddenly foreign home. I remembered the radio playing a classic 1978 hit that used to make us dance in the living room every Sunday afternoon, now sounding like a cruel joke, as if the universe was mocking my devotion. I glanced at the photo of his first day at school, September 3rd, 1998, holding a tiny backpack and a nervous smile, and I realized that the boy in the picture and the man in front of me were separated by choices I hadn't been allowed to witness. He said again with a smirk, "We got married yesterday. I think you would like that." I couldn't believe the arrogance, the audacity, the complete disregard for my feelings, my heart pounding, my palms sweaty. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a dog from 2 houses down the street, every sensory detail amplifying surreal nightmare. I was trapped, and I wanted to ask where the wedding was, who was invited, why didn't he tell me? But the words escaped me like mist in the wind. The irony that I had spent 32 years of my life investing in every birthday, every Christmas, every school project, every sleepless night. And this moment now was exactly what I feared, yet never imagined would happen. The wooden spoon I had used to stir the coffee now felt heavy in my hand, the steam fog in my glasses making the world blur. And I thought to myself, I need to breathe. I need to think. I need to do something. In 15 minutes, something would change everything, and I would not let this disrespect pass unnoticed. You ever had a moment where your whole life feels like it was ignored? A moment where the person you raised decided to rewrite the rules without you? If you have shared in the comments below, because what happened next would alter the course of our family forever. And I promise by the end of this story, you will feel every ounce of shock, indignation, and finally satisfaction that I did as a father confronting a choice that was never meant to be mine, but had become my battle. And in those 15 minutes, as I stood there in the yellow morning light of my kitchen on Elm Street with my heart racing, I realized that every sacrifice, every dollar, every sleepless night had prepared me for this exact confrontation. And the story that follows will show you how even in the face of utter betrayal, the balance of power can shift dramatically. I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a small yellow house on 14th Avenue, where every morning the smell of fresh brewed coffee mixed with the scent of my mother's homemade bread and the distant hum of the city waking up. I remember my parents telling me that every sacrifice is an investment in the future, and I carried that lesson with me all the way to raising my own family. I worked as a civil engineer for 45 years, meticulously saving every paycheck I ever earned, every raise, every bonus, adding up to a total of $312,486.75 in my savings account, just to make sure my son could have opportunities one never had. I remember buying him his first bicycle on June 15th, 2005, a shiny red Schwinn with chrome handlebars and white rubber tires, and spending 3 Saturdays fixing it together in the garage, the smell of motor oil and sawdust lingering around us. His first piano lesson on September 2nd, 2006 cost $1,250, and I remember watching him struggle with Beethoven's for at least a click-clack of the keys filling our living room as I encourage him to keep going. I paid for every summer camp at Lake Okoboji from June 10th, 2007 to August 15th, 2010 totaling $9,872, and every dance recital in Des Moines. I drove him 32 miles every Friday night to the studio on Oak Street in West Des Moines, listening to him chatter about his friends, his dreams, his tiny victories, and setbacks in the backseat as the neon lights of the city flickered past us. The sacrifices weren't just financial. I skipped vacations to Florida with friends in 2012 and 2015 so I could fund his college application fees, $432 each time, and his tutoring sessions, $1,208 total. In his junior year, I remember losing sleep over him when he was sick with the flu on December 3rd, 2011, and every night I stayed up until 3 a.m. sitting by his bedside with the cool cotton blanket my mother had knitted for me in 1974, feeling the fever on his forehead and the rhythm of his breaths as if counting them would keep him safe. I did all of this because I loved him unconditionally, because I wanted him to feel supported, and because I believed that family meant always being there even when the world was harsh and unforgiving. I remember the first signs of disconnection, almost imperceptible at first. He started answering my calls with monosyllables and rolling his eyes when I suggested family dinners in July 2017. I ignored it, thinking it was part of growing up and seeking independence, but the sting of being disregarded was already forming slowly like ice in the veins. I had a flashback to the summer of 1985 when I first held him in my arms in a hospital room at Mercy Hospital, the scent of antiseptic mixed with the softness of his baby skin, and the tiny cries that seemed to shake the entire room. And I thought about how much I had invested in his life, how many dreams I had nurtured, how many tears I had wiped, and now here I was in 25 in my kitchen on Elm Street, staring at the man he had become and the life he had built without me knowing. I had spent 32 years preparing for moments like this, teaching him values, teaching him respect, teaching him patience and empathy, and now it seemed that all of those lessons had evaporated into thin air. He told me casually while sipping on his coffee at 7:43 a.m., "We already got married yesterday," and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, every thump like a hammer pounding on glass. I asked where and who and why, and he shrugged with a careless smile. "My daughter in law, Julie, who I had met once at a barbecue on July 4th. 2019 had apparently orchestrated everything. She and my son had booked a small chapel on Maple Avenue in Cedar Rapids and invited a handful of friends and relatives. Without even a whisper to me, I realized that I had created a life for him filled with opportunities, love, security, and guidance. And yet he chose to exclude me from perhaps the most important day of his life. I remember pacing back and forth across the living room, the texture of the old oak floor pressing against my socks, the faint smell of vanilla from the candle I had lit still lingering as I tried to process the injustice, the growing sense of humiliation like a slow fire inside me, yet tempered by every memory of patience and care I had cultivated over decades. I thought about my sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my countless hours of driving around the city to soccer games, piano lessons, dance studios, summer camps, and college tours, and how each one of those moments had been invested with love, hope, and expectation, and now reduced to a casual statement, "We already did it." And I realized that the foundation of trust one had built over 32 years had been cracked in a single moment. You ever give everything you have to someone, and then suddenly feel like a stranger in your own home? If you have felt that, leave a comment, because what comes next shows how even when you are deeply hurt and humiliated, there is a way to reclaim dignity and shift the balance in ways you never imagined. And as I stood there staring at the clock at exactly 8:02 a.m. with the sound of the city outside mixing with the quiet of my home, I knew that the next steps would not be easy, but they would be necessary. And in this story, you will witness every detail, every decision, every calculation that went into turning despair into empowerment and humiliation into a lesson of unwavering strength. The moment I tried to confront him about the wedding on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, at precisely 8:17 a.m., the arrogance in his face was unbearable. He crossed his arms and said, "Dad, I told you already." And I saw the smirk. Julie, the daughter-in-law, stood behind with her arms folded like a statue of disdain. I tried to stay calm. I said with as much patience as I could muster, "We need to talk about this. We need to discuss our family." He laughed and said, "Discuss what Dad has done the small hall of." My kitchen felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in, and I could hear the faint click of the neighbor's door down the street, as if even the world outside was watching my humiliation. I attempted to explain the sacrifices of 32 years of investment in every detail, his upbringing, the money, the time to love, $312,486.75 saved for college, $9,008. $172 spent on summer camps, $1,250 on piano lessons, the countless rides back and forth 32 miles each way every Friday night to Oak Street. Dan's studio, listening to him chatter about dreams and disappointments, but he waved me off with a dismissive flick of his hand and said, "Dad, enough already, we made our choice." I tried reasoning with him like a careful chess player, every word deliberate, every point backed by decades of effort and experience, yet the arrogance only grew. Julie chimed in, saying, "You always overreact. And Dad, he doesn't need you to approve his life." I felt a sharp sting, a betrayal not only from my son, but from someone I had only met once at a barbecue on July 4th, 2019, who now sided so easily with him. I looked out the window and saw Mrs. Patterson across the street, watching from her porch. She held her phone in her hand, recording the confrontation, perhaps not realizing she would witness what would become an unforgettable escalation. I moved closer to them and said, "Calm down. We can work this out. I need to know who was there. How many guests? Why didn't anyone tell me?" And he leaned back in the chair in the living room. The quilt my grandmother had made in 1972 still draped over the sofa behind him, and said there were 10 people, including us, and it was private. Why would you care? I felt my chest tighten, my palms sweat, the heat in the room rising like a furnace, and the coffee steam swirling in the morning light seemed to mock my struggle. I tried appealing to his memory of family dinners, summer vacations, the countless nights I had stayed up nursing him through fevers. On December 3rd, 2011, the sounds of his small coughs echoing in my mind, and he snapped, "Dad, stop it. This is my life." I felt every ounce of my dignity slipping away, every sacrifice rendered invisible by his casual dismissal. I remember the neighbors, John and Mary, walking past the house at 8:36 a.m., waving hello, yet sensing something wrong in their faces, showing a mix of curiosity and concern. My son ignored everything, my words, my history, my love, every argument I made. Met with contempt, "We already did it," he said again with a cold tone, as if repeating a spell to erase my authority. I tried one last attempt to reason with him, showing him a folder with receipts for $47,632.50 in lessons camps and tutoring, all documented meticulously with dates and signatures, proving the depth of my investment. And he laughed, Julie laughed, both of them filming the moment on their phones, the humiliation compounded by the fact that strangers would witness what I had endured all these years, the arrogance, the disrespect, the casual dismissal of a lifetime of care and guidance. I felt my blood boil, yet I also noticed a slow rise of clarity as I realized that no amount of reasoning would reverse this. Without a decisive move that would reclaim control, I remember the small envelope hidden in the drawer of my desk in the study on 14th Avenue, containing the paperwork for my retirement fund, $312,486.75, and the legal letters I had prepared just in case of family disputes, a contingency built over decades for protection and empowerment. In that moment, the anger mixed with strategy, the realization that humiliation was temporary, but power carefully amassed over decades was permanent. I took a deep breath, listening to the faint hum of traffic on Elm Street, the soft chirping of birds outside, and the muffled laughter of my son and daughter-in-law trying to assert dominance in my home. And I thought to myself, the line has been crossed 15 minutes ago. The tolerance ended. Now I will act, but I must act with precision, because the next steps will not only address this humiliation, but set the stage for a reversal so profound that everyone witnessing will understand that disrespect can meet consequence and betrayal can meet justice. And as I stood there at 8:49 a.m., feeling every thump of my heart echo through my chest, I knew that the story was about to shift from passive endurance to strategic empowerment. And what happens next will show how decades of patience and investment can suddenly turn the tide against arrogance and exclusion. As I stood there in my kitchen on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, at precisely 8:52 a.m., the cold morning sunlight streaming across the floorboards, the smell of coffee still lingering, the quilt my grandmother had sewn for me in 1972 draped over the sofa behind me, I felt a moment of clarity wash over me like a sudden gust of wind. I realized that all the shouting, reasoning, and pleading had been futile, that no amount of emotional appeal could make him see the depth of my investment and the weight of my sacrifices. 32 years of my life, 32 years of love and dedication, could not be erased by a smirk and a casual announcement at 8:55 a.m. I decided I would not allow this disrespect to stand any longer. I could feel the pulse of empowerment rising in my chest. I remember the emergency folder I had prepared in my study on 14th Avenue, the $312,486 and 75 cents retirement fund documents, the legal letters and notarized statements I had assembled over the past 10 years for contingencies like this. Every carefully planned detail suddenly became my lifeline, my secret power, my leverage, and I knew that this was the moment to act with precision, not emotion. I moved deliberately to my desk and retrieved a manila envelope containing every document, every proof of investment, every legal safeguard I had ever prepared, feeling the texture of the paper under my fingers, the faint smell of ink, and the crisp edges signaling the gravity of what was to come. I returned to the living room at 8:59 a.m. and placed the folder on the coffee table in front of my son and Julie, and said calmly, "You may think this is just your life, and that my opinion doesn't matter, but you are about to see that 32 years of patience and dedication have prepared me for moments like this." I opened the folder and began to lay out receipts from June 15th. 2005, the shiny red Schwinn bicycle, the summer camps from June 10th. 2007 to August 15th. 2010 totaling $9,872, the piano lessons $1,250, every tutoring session, every payment, every carefully documented expense. I could see the disbelief crossing their faces, the smirk fading from his lips, the slight twitch of her jaw signaling tension. I continued in a measured voice, "Julie, you may not understand the depth of commitment that goes into raising a child, but every dollar, every hour, every sleepless night is accounted for, every choice documented. And now it has legal weight." I felt a shift in the atmosphere, the arrogance of the last 45 minutes replaced by unease. I paused, letting the moment linger, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, witnessing the beginning of the reversal of the balance of power, subtly tilting. As if the walls themselves sensed a change, I remembered the neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, John, and Mary watching from their porches, recording the events, and I knew that the humiliation they had inflicted on me would now be mirrored in the apprehension, in their own expressions at 9:07 a.m. I continued unfolding contracts, notarized letters, confirming my right to be informed and consulted on family decisions, legal protections for retirement funds, and inheritance details, meticulously prepared since 2015, every document a silent declaration of authority and accountability. I looked at my son and said calmly yet firmly, "From now on we proceed with transparency, respect, and acknowledgement of all parties involved. You may think this is surprising or unfair, but what you see here is the consequence of decades of preparation. You are witnessing not anger but strategy." And as I spoke, I could see the tension build, the arrogance replaced by hesitation. Julie attempted to interrupt, but I raised a hand and said, "Let me finish," and the room fell silent, except for the faint hum of traffic outside the window and the soft chirping of birds in the morning sun. I could feel the first tremors of empowerment ripple through me, the humiliation of the last 45 minutes now transforming into clarity and resolve. I realized that the turning point had come not from confrontation or shouting, but from the calm deployment of carefully accumulated knowledge, resources, and authority. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the energy in the room shifted entirely, the casual dismissal replaced by calculation, the smirk replaced by a careful assessment. I had moved from a position of powerless indignation to strategic empowerment, and I knew that what was about to follow would expose not only their arrogance, but the magnitude of preparation and foresight that had been silently cultivated over decades. I felt my heart steady, the pulse of authority and dignity surging through my veins, and I knew that from this point onward, nothing would be the same. The next steps would be decisive. The humiliation they inflicted would be mirrored back in a revelation of my power. And as I took a final deep breath at 9:18 a.m., I was ready to initiate the next phase of revelation of power that would leave everyone witnessing stunned and reeling as the story of betrayal turned into a tale of empowerment and justice. As I opened the folder fully at 9:21 a.m. in my kitchen on Elm Street, Des Moines, Iowa, the morning sunlight casting long shadows across the oak floorboards, the faint smell of coffee mixing with the paper, ink, I felt the weight of decades of preparation settling into the room. My son's eyes widened slightly, Julie's jaw tightened, as I began to lay out notarized documents, contracts, bank statements, and letters from financial advisors, confirming my control over the retirement fund, $312,486.75, and detailing the legal obligations for family notifications, every investment, every decision recorded meticulously from June 15th, 2005 to December 3rd, 2019, I said calmly yet firmly, you may have thought this was your moment alone, but you did not account for 32 years of strategy, 32 years of preparation, and the legal safeguards put in place for circumstances exactly like this. I could see the disbelief crossing their faces, the arrogance replaced by an uneasy silence. I pointed to the notarized letter dated March 2nd. 2015, signed by my lawyer, confirming that any major family decisions, including marriages involving direct descendants, require written notification to me as the primary guardian of family oversight. At the same time, I revealed receipts for the 10 summer camps at Lake Okoboji, totaling $9,872 piano lessons, $1,250, tutoring $1,208, and every other documented investment, showing my unwavering commitment to his upbringing. I said softly, but with absolute authority, from now on you will include me in every major decision, not because I seek control, but because respect, accountability, and transparency matter, and the consequences for ignoring them are legally binding. Julie attempted to interrupt, saying, "Dad, that's not fair." But I shook my head calmly and said, "You have had your turn to disrespect my investment in this family. Now you must acknowledge it." The neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, John, and Mary, who had been watching from their porches and recording the confrontation now, leaned forward, their faces showing shock as the realization of the meticulous preparation I had undertaken became clear. Even strangers walking past paused to witness the shift in energy in the room. At 9:37 a.m., I handed a copy of the documents to my son and said, "Keep this as a reminder that arrogance and secrecy cannot erase decades of care." His hands trembled slightly as he took the folder, realizing the scope of oversight and authority I had silently cultivated over decades. I said calmly, "The balance of power is restored not through anger, but through preparation, knowledge, and unwavering consistency." And as I spoke, I could see Julie's face pale, the confident smirk replaced by calculation. She glanced at the cameras, recording the moment from the neighbors' porches, and her eyes betrayed the shock of understanding the extent of my planning. I continued detailing the legal precedents, the notarized instructions, and the historical documentation of my financial and emotional investment from my first day holding him in a hospital at Mercy Hospital, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, on September 3rd, 1998, through every birthday, graduation, and summer camp. I reminded them of the sacrifices, sleepless nights, febrile nights of care on December 3rd. 2011, every mile driven 32 miles each way every Friday night to Oak Street Dance Studio, and every piano lesson with the click-clack of the keys still echoing in my memory. I said, "You may have thought exclusion would grant freedom, but what it really grants is accountability and the revelation of power." I possessed. The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic, the faint chirping of birds, and the subtle creak of floorboards. As the weight of my decades of preparation became undeniable, I felt the shift solidify, the arrogance and casual dismissal now replaced by calculated respect, and perhaps fear. I reminded them again at 9:45 a.m. These documents are not threats, they are evidence of a lifetime of dedication, and a reminder that decisions have consequences. And the shock on their faces was amplified as the reality sank in that every action taken to ignore my involvement was now reversible and under scrutiny. The neighbors' cameras captured every detail, the expressions, the pauses, the subtle changes in body language, all evidencing the dramatic reversal in power. I concluded calmly, "You may have thought that yesterday was your day, but today the truth comes to light, and every witness here sees the scale of preparation, dedication, and authority that was underestimated for far too long." At 9:50 a.m., I leaned back slightly, feeling the calm of empowerment wash over me, knowing that the revelation was complete. The balance of power irrevocably shifted, and the lesson had been made clear through meticulous planning, strategic action, and unwavering consistency, that even decades of arrogance cannot withstand when met with decades of preparation and foresight. By 9:52 a.m., the atmosphere in my kitchen on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, had shifted completely. The arrogance of my son and Julie replaced by unease and hesitation. The sunlight, highlighting the document, spread across the oak floor, the faint smell of coffee still lingering like a silent witness to the unfolding justice. I looked at them calmly and said, "From this moment forward, transparency, accountability, and respect are not suggestions, they are requirements. You will include me in every major family decision, and every exclusion will have legal consequences." The documents detailing my $312,486.75 retirement fund, the notarized letters from March 2nd, 2015, and the receipts from every summer camp piano lesson tutoring session and birthday investment lay between us as undeniable evidence of preparation, decades of patience, and dedication. My son's hands trembled slightly as he picked up a receipt from June 15th, 2005 for the shiny red Schwinn bicycle, and the realization of his exclusion dawned on him. Julie's face paled, her confident smirk gone, replaced by a forced composure. I said calmly, the exclusion and arrogance displayed earlier this morning will now be documented, and any further attempt to bypass my involvement will be legally addressed as agreed upon in these notarized documents across the street. Mrs. Patterson raised her phone, capturing every moment. John and Mary leaned against the fence, whispering among themselves, noting the shift in power. Even strangers walking past paused on the sidewalk to witness what was unfolding. The humiliation they had attempted to impose on me was now mirrored back at them in the undeniable display of preparation, authority, and consequence. I continued, pointing to each document, the contracts confirming oversight on family decisions, the detailed account of $47,632.50 in extracurricular activities, the $9,872 spent on summer camps, the $1,250 piano lessons, the $1,208 tutoring sessions, every documented choice I made over decades as a parent to secure his future. And I said with calm authority, today, you see that arrogance cannot erase decades of dedication, that casual dismissal cannot override careful planning, and that exclusion carries consequences. The reactions were immediate. Julie attempted to interject, saying, "But Dad, I didn't mean." I held up a hand and said, "No interruptions. The documentation speaks for itself. Every witness here sees that." And the neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, John, and Mary nodded, subtly recording and commenting among themselves that the scale of preparation was staggering. My son finally spoke, his voice shaky and quiet. "Dad, I understand I misjudged the situation. I didn't realize." I nodded and said, "You will now act with transparency, and every major decision will include consultation and acknowledgement as required legally and ethically." And the weight of the reality settled into their expressions, the shift irreversible to previous control they assumed over the situation, replaced by careful calculation. I continued calmly as the clock struck 10:05 a.m., detailing the immediate corrective measures. The notifications to all parties involve a requirement for formal acknowledgement of my involvement in past and future decisions, and the legal recourse available if exclusion continued. The impact was visible. Julie's shoulders slumped slightly. My son's face reflected the gravity of the consequences, and even neighbors captured every nuance. The humiliation they tried to inflict now fully reversed as the public witnesses acknowledged my authority and foresight. The documents and receipts lay like a map of decades of dedication, highlighting the arrogance of the past attempts at exclusion and the calculated justice that followed. I reminded them again, every action has consequences, every choice documented, and the failure to respect decades of investment has been met with immediate accountability. At 10:12 a.m., the balance of power fully restored. The humiliation they sought to impose on me reflected back in their own uncertainty, and the approval and quiet admiration from the neighbors added to the emotional satisfaction. The story of betrayal transformed into a lesson of empowerment, strategy, and justice. In real time, the finality of the consequences, clear, the reversal complete, and the room now filled with a sense of respect, acknowledgement, and an unspoken lesson that arrogance and exclusion cannot triumph over preparation, dedication, and unwavering authority. By 10:20 a.m. on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, the tension that had gripped my kitchen for nearly 3 hours had finally lifted. The sunlight, now warm and golden, streaming through the blue-painted window frames, illuminating the documents and receipts spread across the oak floor, the faint smell of coffee lingering as a comforting reminder of normalcy. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the quilt my grandmother had sewn in 1970. Two beneath me, feeling the weight of what had just transpired, I reflected on the 32 years of investment, sleepless nights, febrile care. On December 3rd, 2011, every mile driven, 32 miles each way to Oak Street Dance Studio, every summer camp at Lake Okoboji, every piano lesson, every tutoring session, every birthday and milestone carefully recorded and invested in with love and expectation. I realized that this moment of revelation and consequence was not merely about asserting authority, but about reclaiming dignity, protecting what mattered, and transforming betrayal into empowerment. I looked at my son, who sat quietly holding the folder containing receipts and notarized documents, his expression now a mix of respect, remorse, and comprehension. I said softly, "Dad, I mean, son, you need to understand that the choices we make impact those around us, and transparency is not limitation. It is trust. He nodded and whispered, I understand now. The lesson had been received to public witnesses, including Mrs. Patterson, John, and Mary, and even strangers passing by had seen the consequences of arrogance, exclusion, and casual dismissal. The cameras recorded everything, capturing the transformation from humiliation to empowerment. The lesson extended beyond family dynamics. The story is a reminder that every sacrifice, every investment, and every act of dedication counts, even when it seems unacknowledged at the moment. And I turned to the camera and said to you watching, if you have ever felt ignored, undervalued, or excluded, know that preparation, patience, and strategic action can restore dignity and balance. Even the most difficult situations take time to document your efforts to protect what matters, and never underestimate the power of consistent dedication. I encourage engagement and connection, leaving the viewer with clear CTAs. I said, share your story in the comments below, connect with others who have faced similar injustices, reflect on your own sacrifices and strategies, subscribe and activate the notification bell for more stories that empower and inspire. Join the community where your experiences are valued and your voice is heard. As I spoke, I felt a profound sense of closure. Humiliation that had once seemed unbearable now transformed into a testament of resilience and foresight. I reminded my son and Julie calmly and firmly that moving forward, transparency, respect, and inclusion would guide our family decisions. And they nodded, understanding that the past could not be erased, but the future could be directed with accountability. The room now filled with a sense of calm, dignity, and reconciliation, a transformation not only in our relationships, but in my own perspective on the power of preparation. Decades of effort and patience can culminate in moments of profound impact. And I concluded with a memorable statement that echoed to the neighborhood streets. The story of betrayal became a story of empowerment, and justice, a reminder to everyone watching that even in the face of exclusion, arrogance, and disrespect, there is always a path to reclaim authority, dignity, and respect. And as I looked out the window, the sunlight glinting on the street signs on Elm Street in Des Moines, Iowa, I felt a sense of completion, knowing that the lessons learned today would resonate not only with my family, but with everyone who has ever felt invisible, unheard, or undervalued. And the final message to you is this: protect what matters, document your dedication, act strategically, and never underestimate the power of preparation and foresight. And remember, your story matters. Share it, engage, and inspire others. And together we transform injustice into empowerment.